So you've got your brand new chemical storage equipment and you're taking those important steps to make sure your workplace has its dangerous goods risks under control. But have you given thought to the ongoing compliance of this equipment? Today we're talking about creating an inspection checklist to make sure your dangerous goods equipment remains fit for purpose. So Mel, why is an inspection checklist important?
Yes, so an inspection checklist is important because it's a work health safety obligation to ensure you inspect and maintain your controls. So whether you have an industrial robot on site, a forklift or an outdoor chemical store, each piece of equipment needs to be regularly maintained and inspected to ensure safety and compliance. So it's important to identify any misuse or damage of your equipment to get any hazards under control really quickly before they become a major problem. Regular inspection and maintenance also improves the longevity of your equipment, which overall ensures site safety.
So yeah, I think we've both seen various examples in different workplaces of things that could have been picked up if a regular inspection process was in place.
Yeah, for sure.
For example, I've seen in workplaces flammable liquids cabinets surrounded by and with piles of combustible materials on top of,
Yes.
which would have been picked up in an inspection process, and maybe the staff informed that you shouldn't be piling cardboard and other things on top of a flammables cabinet. Another thing would be mixed classes of chemicals being put back into cabinets and chemical containers with spillage around the outsides that probably should have been cleaned up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like another one is quite frequently we see is outdoor stores with vegetation taking over or nearby, so needing to ensure that that's pruned back. Another extreme example is microwaves on top of flammable liquids cabinets. It is quite an extreme example, but we have seen it a couple of times, and it's the main issue there being the ignition source, but something that could be picked up on it with an inspection checklist. So Pat, what are some general steps for creating a inspection checklist, whether it be for your outdoor store, your cabinet or your emergency equipment?
Yep. So first of all, just make a list of all of your dangerous goods storage equipment. And then you want to determine the specific criteria for each cabinet, bund or store or handling device based on the type of equipment and the kind of chemicals that are being stored. This will determine the hazards that you are trying to control. This sounds complicated, but we'll go into that a bit later on. And so then you'll want to set up a regular inspection of the equipment with designated staff who have the knowledge to identify any issues. I would suggest daily inspections for things like major damage, door closing issues or spills, and weekly for other inspections.
Okay.
So then formulate a housekeeping and maintenance plan to quickly rectify these issues. So Mel, can you tell us the key things that we're looking for in an inspection?
Yeah, sure. So in the case of equipment not being used safely, the key things you should look for is the wrong chemicals being stored. So that could be something like, the wrong chemicals in the wrong location or keeping the chemicals in the spill sump, which is a big no-no. We should be checking for the loading capacity of the cabinet. So check that the cabinet's being filled, loaded with the correct capacity and not beyond it, because that will compromise the sump. When your staff are filling the cabinet and they're placing the chemicals safely on the shelves, the flammable cabinets shouldn't have, 20-litre drums stacked more than too high. So just checking for stacking issues like that. And so you should also ensure that the chemical containers are suitable for the product being stored. So are they marked with the GHS labelling system? Are the labels legible? And are they in good condition so that staff can accurately know what's being handled? And then there's very basic and obvious inspections such as, is the equipment clean? Is it being wiped down and looked after well? And is it fit for purpose as well? So is it the right equipment for the job?
Yep. So then we'll move on to looking for issues with operation. So structural damage. So you can look for signs of impact, structural damage, dents, tears, rust or corrosion. Check all the components and features of the equipment to ensure they are working properly and there's no issues there. Is the equipment stable? Are there any imbalances, such as a cabinet not being placed on a suitable surface or a gas bottle trolley that's developed a wobble?
Yeah.
So chemical cabinets, everything should be stable. Obviously, you don't need anything tipping over, but they'll also only function properly if they're on a perfectly level
Yeah,
surface
that's
a lot
right.
of the time.
The door closing mechanisms especially.
Yep, correct. And so does your equipment have a lock if a lock is required? And is it working properly? Do you have a spare key? That might be something that you want to consider as well.
Yep.
And a really important one is check your doors are closing tightly. If it's a Storemasta safety close product, like our flammable cabinets, they should be closing automatically and in sequence and in a smooth manner every time. So you'll want to be checking that they're not slamming, for example, as we want to make sure that there's no risk of any sparking or sparks.
Yeah. The next thing to do is hazard identification. So is there sufficient ventilation in the storage area? If there is a mechanical ventilation system, is it working and is it being maintained correctly? Have you isolated and segregated your chemicals from any hazards? So this could be ignition sources or heat or sunlight. You should also be checking your safety data sheets. So you need to understand how to properly handle and store those particular chemicals, and ensure that there's no incompatible substances kept near the cabinet. So you need to really adhere to those dangerous goods segregation guidelines. And then the last one we had there was identify residue, leaks and spills within the storage area, and then have them cleaned up promptly by the spill response team.
And then check on the signage and hazard visibility. So look out for deteriorated or illegible signage, including dangerous goods, diamonds, and hazard signage. Make sure the correct signage is on your store and that your storage area is well lit, so staff don't make any errors when assessing chemicals or returning chemicals or anything like that.
Once you've taken all those applicable points, you can apply them to whatever equipment that you may have, whether you're inspecting a cabinet or a bund, spill kit, emergency equipment, a safety shower or an eye wash, it's all still applicable.
For something like a spill kit, you'll have to ensure that it's been restocked after it's been used, if it's been used, and check that none of the items inside show signs of aging or soiling or disrepair. So everything's in there in good condition.
Yeah, for sure. And then for something like a safety shower or an eye wash, you can obviously test that it's working properly. These tests should be carried out anyway. But you also should be testing for damage or anything else like that.
For something like a battery cabinet, will have its own specific requirements as well. You want to check that the power point being used is suitable and keep an eye on that. So you can use as many of those points as we've just mentioned as is applicable to the piece of equipment that you're creating the checklist for, and also use your SDS, your risk assessment, and understanding of the functionality of the equipment to create your unique list that's specific to that piece of equipment.
Perfect. And you'll also want to leave space on your checklist for a few other things. So you want to have your date and time of inspection on there, your name or signature or initials of the inspectors or auditors. You need to have a checkbox or a compliance indicator next to each item. So yes, no, or not applicable. Details of the corrective actions, so the next steps, and date of the corrective action that it was implemented. And then you also want to just have your signature or initials of the operator who implemented those corrective actions.
Yeah, so those points to add onto the list are really for traceability and accountability, taking responsibility and ensuring that it is completed and someone's responsible for that.
Exactly.
And then if there are any issues in the future, you can go back and say, this was inspected and this is what we found or didn't find and it was signed off.
That's how it was corrected.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
So now that you have your inspection checklist, how often do you need to be carrying out one of these inspections?
Yes. So it is recommended that you carry out these inspections weekly. However, many of these observations should become habits that you or your staff or colleagues should incorporate into your everyday use of the equipment. It is noted that irregularities should be rectified immediately, or they should be flagged for corrective actions to be taken as soon as possible.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so if your staff and colleagues have a good understanding of what's on that checklist, they should be able to incorporate those things to become habits so that every time they're returning a chemical to a cabinet or getting something out, they're just naturally looking for a spill or damage or something like that. So it's part of your everyday process.
They're noticing anything that looks out of the ordinary. And we also have a note here that, any issues should be rectified immediately as well.
So yeah, hopefully you've got a little bit of an understanding about inspection checklists and how to generate a checklist that you can use to ensure that your products or equipment, your equipment on site is staying functional and compliant.
And that way you can ensure that you're fulfilling your work health safety obligations.
If you need some more guidance with your checklists, you can visit the Storemaster blog page where you can download a cabinet maintenance inspection checklist template or read more about inspections and what's required and inspections for different types of equipment as well.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're still unsure about if your equipment is fit for purpose or still in good working order, you can reach out to us. We can run you through the options, including spare part replacements or any updated equipment to meet the Australian standards.
Yep. In the next episode of Chemical Safety at Work, we'll be talking to the Storemasta CEO Caleb Urquhart, who's going to talk a little bit about the background of Storemaster and his experience and some of the things he's seen evolve in the industry over the last decade that he's been doing this.
Looking forward to that.
Great. Cool. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.